Children, and welcome to yet another crowd design discussion around Alice Asylum. This is episode 12 of our ongoing series in which we are discussing community ideas and suggestions, and we're also reviewing the art, story, and design work being done by our pre production team for the next Alice game. If you would like to join in on these discussions in real time, we do have a Discord server set up where our insane children are able to chat with us via text. And if they have a microphone, they can also use the microphone emoji in the chat to indicate that they want to join the voice discussion. For those insane children that are in the chat and may want to use their microphone, please do check to make sure that you do not have push to talk enabled unless you actually intend to push to talk. Otherwise, your microphone will not activate and we will not be able to hear you. You can find links to our Patreon community where you can gain access to Discord in the description below if you're following along on YouTube. And you will also find the links to the wiki at AmericanMcGee.com, where the suggestions and the design work and everything else that we're going to be talking about today can be viewed. And so with that out of the way, I think we'll ask if our mods who are in the channel have anything additional to add.
Nope, rather be here with you guys than watching E3.
I could agree with that, probably.
But what if you were in the room with Keanu Reeves? Would you rather be here or in the room with Keanu Reeves is the question.
Well, you're beautiful for asking that.
All right. So, before this gets too weird, let's move on to ideas and suggestions. Today we're going to focus on a list of story ideas and suggestions. There are about 25 of them in the list currently. Probably we will not get through all of those, but we will start at the beginning, which is at point number 1. Someone has suggested that Alice believes she has made it out of Wonderland and returned to London only for everything to catch fire, and she realizes she never left. And then in parentheses, this person has also added that maybe after the defeat of the Jabberwock/fake goal. Yeah, this is, I think, something we've seen in the previous Alice game in Madness Returns, where there's sort of a sense that Alice believes she's in one place or she may be talking to a certain character, and then that scene transforms in some way that defies what it is that we think is happening. So to suggest that we might have some scenes in the new game where that sort of mechanic is also employed is not too far-fetched. I'm curious if there are any bits of feedback from our insane children on this point. Anybody have anything they want to add to that?
I quite like the idea. A bit of a fake out is always fun. Quite like the that was sort of like at the end of. There's no spoiler here. It's an old movie. You've seen 1408. There's a bit of a fake out like that.
Oh, that was great. Like, yeah, great.
It's a great movie. But he thinks he's escaped, and he actually lives a year of his life thinking he's escaped, but he hasn't. So yeah, I like a good fake out.
Yeah, and I mean, again, we're playing a lot with perception too in this game. Like, we already have the Dark Alice concepts. We have a lot of ability to play with things.
So for me, I think one of the questions when we have a point like this that's brought up is the question of timing. So sort of a question of where in the narrative would a thing like this make sense? Now, when I've thought about how we're telling the story here, there are places, I think, at the very beginning of this story where we may see Alice at a point that appears to be the end of Alice Madness Returns, somehow having her expectations about her reality violated. It could make sense there. I think that, for the other story we've outlined, where we have a young Alice working her way through Wonderland, there could be a kind of false exit any point in the story. But I think a lot of times when I read these suggestions, one of the thoughts that comes to mind is, where is this appropriate and why? At what point in the storytelling would this make the most sense? Would it be most surprising, and have sort of the largest impact on people? You want to kind of violate expectations, but also you want to lead the player to feel smart by guessing about what's going to happen next. And so I think one of the questions when I read something like this is where and why would we see this happen? I don't know if we have any suggestions on that just yet. Maybe not. But
Well, I'm sorry, I was typing it out too, but Arcadia says that, as written in the comment, most likely after the defeat of the Jabberwocky, because it would feel like we beat the game. And that's exactly a proper point.
right, where we said we were gonna beat the Jabberwocky yet?
That's the question, I guess. The other
Okay.
thing is, I don't think we want to go too far into the game and then pull the rug out, if that makes sense. I would rather see it as something that's, not to say midway, maybe like a third of the way through. So kind of
But
as, I'm sorry. No.
oh, it's okay. I guess would you believe the fake exit if it only happened a few hours into the game? You'd be like, this can't be real. I've only been playing this game for. I mean, you'd be heading over to write a really negative review before we even got through with the scene. You'd be like, this game was only 4 hours long. Damn it.
I'll give you that. I guess it just reminds me of Final Fantasy VI, where you think you beat the game, and then Kefka comes and screws everything up,
Right.
which is halfway through the game. And that's kind of happens in a lot of other Final Fantasy games, where it's like halfway through, oh, by the way.
Mm.
So
Well, the Jabberwock, as I understand our sketch of it right now, would be a character that the Queen has actually sent us to the Hatter to recover the parts, the mechanics necessary to repair him. So the defeat, we could have one very early in the game where Alice sort of faces off against an injured and malfunctioning Jabberwock, but I think that would be too obvious, in terms of like, this can't be the real end of the game. So then the other logical place to put it would be the mechanical Jabberwock after we've helped to repair him, and then we fight him and defeat him, and then we think we can escape. So it might make sense to kind of think about it placed after Alice has met the Queen, after she's helped Hatter to collect the parts to rebuild the Jabberwock, and then we'd have a moment where we could fight him.
Tyler goes over a good thing about the different concepts needed to achieve goals. And I think finding where that fits in would probably be best too.
Yeah. The list that she's put together here, I don't know if it's in a final order. I know this was a sort of sketch of some thoughts that I had on the things she should achieve, but we've not ordered a lot of this yet. So one thing to keep in mind, a lot of the work that we're doing right now, if you could imagine that some of these scenes and concepts, like this concept, are on a note card, and then we have them all up on a wall, and then we can scoot them around, in order to put together a timeline that not only makes sense but also creates drama. And so the list that she's put here is a good one, but I don't know that we've just yet decided in what order these would happen. So something to think about.
Yeah, I would say though the Jabberwock, especially after we spent time trying to create it, would probably be a good point to pull the rug out from people.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, let's sort of pin that to the tail of the Jabberwock then, this point of sort of fake out win, and then actually she comes back. So we can move along to point number 2. This is to say that Alice's mental state deteriorates to the point of damaging her legs, where she then goes through a painful transformation into having jellyfish tentacles, possibly a jellyfish dress. So kind of curious to hear where this is coming from and how we might see this fitting into the narrative in general.
More dresses. That's just what we need right now.
Right.
Love the
Yeah,
creativity.
It's just kind of one of those odd ideas that someone has. It's kind of hard to say where they thought about it fitting in. It's just they had an idea and they went with it.
Yeah. One of the issues I would see with something like this is that it's not an issue, but this is something that would certainly need explaining. You'd have to deliver quite a bit of exposition. So, in other words, a character who says to Alice, "Hey, you ate the wrong side of that cake. So now instead of getting smaller, you're gonna grow jellyfish legs." And so yeah, that's a Rick and Morty uh, reference for those who don't know. So yeah, I mean, you'd have to have someone tell her at some point that this is what's happening. That as you become less stable, so maybe as you take more damage, you are going to convert more and more into jellyfish legs and or a jellyfish dress. And I guess the other question is, so what happens once we've reached the end state here? Do we then jellyfish around for the rest of the game? It's an interesting, I don't know, it's an interesting point. I'm not sure I see where it fits, though.
Yeah, it's an odd one. I mean, it might look fun. Having a walking around with a big slimy jellyfish tentacles slopping around everywhere. It's an odd one. All right.
I think there's another question we need when we're coming up with these sort of story points is most of the time when you're writing, there's this idea that you write and then you write again and you write again on a story, and what you're actually doing on the second and third and fourth revision is you're cutting away material, and the final version of your story, oftentimes you're trying to get to a point where it's the least amount of story for the most amount of communicating your intention. And a lot of times when I read these kinds of points, it almost feels like we're coming at it the other way around. It's sort of, hey, what is all the stuff we could do? And then I often will see something like this and I'll think, well, how does this serve the story we're trying to tell? At what point do we as the audience see this and go, oh yeah, that must be it's an allegory for, or it's communicating the fact of, and then fill in the blank. But I'm not really sure what a jellyfish dress communicates.
Well, Taylor put up the original idea, if you see it, and there's mentions of a swimming level.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, I just saw
That's
someone
it.
mention jiggle physics. Had to
Simple as.
step away from the mic.
Right. So I'm reading this, and the concept is that the mental state deteriorates to the point of damaging her legs, and so this is symbolizing her rage and indifference to whether or not she hurts people or the things around her with the tentacles. And I guess one of when we talk about this, it's sort of, do we not already have this represented, say for instance, by a chaos or rage mode, and then also using fire? And that again links back into the overall narrative of a fire having destroyed Alice's family, fire being the catalyst that transforms her into the character that we all know and love. Unless there were jellyfish also somehow implicated in the fire, I think that the question becomes, why double up with jellyfish tentacles when I think we've already got the rage fire connection going on. Yeah, there's quite a few comments here. We've got the dresses. We've got a lot of dresses already. Yeah, and that the water stuff is sort of, most people are a little bit hesitant to go back into doing water levels in the game.
Oh, those pesky water levels.
Yeah. So I guess on this idea, I don't know if this is, if I understand where this would fit just yet, or why this particular story. That's not to say that perhaps we do end up in an underwater level. We do end up in a communication with the walrus, and then we have figured out a way to have this kind of concept. You know, this is the problem. In Wonderland, things don't necessarily have to make sense, but at the same time, it can't just all be kind of random, right? So it might make sense for this type of idea if you were to sit down and sort of write it out a bit more, um, and then link it into gameplay and link it into some characters that maybe this is sort of forced upon her. Okay, we have the Carbon Coast saying, "Can anyone get me into the chat? It won't allow me." Carbon Coast, I don't know if you heard at the beginning of the session, but you need to check to see if your push to talk is enabled, and make sure that it is not if you're not using push to talk.
I don't see them in the channel. I think they just mean they can't get in here.
I just saw him. He's
I just unmuted him on my side, so
Oh,
give it a shot.
Yay.
Do you have something to say? Carbon Coast?
Carbon Coast, you are unmuted, but it may be that you have push to talk enabled, so you may want to go into your settings and check to see if that is the case. All right, so we're going to move along to point 3 until maybe Carbon Coast pops up. So point 3 here, the end would reveal that we have been Shadow Alice all along throughout the events of Alice Asylum. That's why Alice's friends treat her as an enemy, right? We have already, I think, discussed quite a few ways to come at this. And one of them is that we have Shadow Alice actually moving through the world ahead of us and causing chaos and upsetting the people who we will eventually meet as young Alice. So there are two characters right now in the story that we've been working on. One of them is young Alice and one of them is Shadow Alice. And then what we've said is that young Alice goes through the events of the fire, and we see her going through the events of Asylum all the way up to the point of the denouement, the final battle. And that's when Chaos Alice will reveal herself and say that, hey, I am you, you are me, and I've already gone forward to defeat our future enemies, and now I'm back to release you from being trapped in this sort of Groundhog Day of endless battles. So I think to suggest that we have been Shadow Alice all along would undo a lot of that. So I guess I'd be curious to hear what the thinking is on this number.
that is
3.
Octo
Let's-
Chicken Greg's point,
Yep,
and
have
we already
Octo
unmuted
check,
him,
so we're good.
so we can, yeah.
Hello?
Hello.
All right.
Hello.
Hello, all. Yeah, so this kind of idea of playing as Shadow Alice throughout the whole story kind of relates to some like the issues that I'd heard in previous design discussions where people were saying, like, how do you wrap this all up and how do we do like this kind of big reveal, the Kaiser Soze moment of finding out like, oh, Shadow Alice is who we've been playing as in AMA and AMR.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if it wouldn't work as well to have a twist that we've been playing as the Shadow even in this first game in Asylum chronologically. So
Right.
rather than have us pursuing a Shadow Alice who's running ahead and causing chaos, and all our former friends in Wonderland are confused and think like, oh, the child Alice, the real one, whoever that is, and getting confused like a mistaken personality and attacking the player, it would be that the real Alice has been kind of running ahead of us and we've been chasing after her, and it's the citizens of Wonderland are defending the real Alice, the one they know from before, against this shadow that has come into their world as a result of the fire, as a result of the trauma. And the real one is who's turning Wonderland against the player. And I think it could lead to like a final boss fight. We've been some discussion on the idea of a losing to win at the end of the game. And I worry as a player that people will look at that and be like, well, this is kind of unfair. I'm losing agency at the end of the story. Whereas if you play as the Shadow and you get to the end and you find that your final boss is just this little girl, maybe the shadow has pity and says, you know what, I'm not going to fight you. I've learned all these skills throughout this journey, and I can continue on and fight this war and leave the child behind to remain kind of innocent and not have to confront this horror until it's ready someday in the future.
Right.
And I think you could have like a cutscene or a scenario that shows, you know, this realization that throughout the whole story we have been this shadow. These like little moments that before maybe didn't quite make sense all kind of fall into place at the end as we see, oh, we were this antagonistic force. We represented perhaps like some kind of the truth or reality of this trauma that the child just cannot on her own face, that Wonderland can't face. And then eventually that would lead to the potential way down the line post AMR that the shadow could return to find the child and say, listen, I fought our demons, our evils, and it's safe now for you to come back and for this kind of innocence to be allowed to be free again, I guess.
Right. So I have a couple of questions, or sort of. First is you said that in order to beat the end of Asylum, we may have to lose to win.
Yeah, I
Um,
believe it's an idea that brought up a few times, that perhaps like having to put the controller down and walk away at the end. Been
right.
suggested a few times.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a valid, uh, concern, and since we haven't really got there yet, I still don't. I think I have said I don't really know what that ending looks like, but I also am concerned about having a lose to win. I think that the ending, there needs to be a sense of accomplishment and action, and the ultimate goal um, for these two characters, for young Alice and for Shadow Alice, and the ultimate message of this story. I think our overall theme, the ultimate message of this, is could be summed up in the integration of the shadow. That's it. That it's important for us as human beings, for us as agents in the world, to integrate our shadow self in order to be successful in life. So that I think that's the story that we want to tell. And then as far as how that affects what happens at the end, it could be that young Alice actually needs to fight and defeat, but not it's not defeat in the sense of kill, expunge, remove. It could be there is a final battle between her and Shadow Alice. There is an actual fight, but that little Alice kicks, the ass of Shadow Alice, but at the same time says, I kick your ass, but I also recognize that I need you, and then they become one and the choir sings, and it's the end of the game, right? um, so I think we can solve that problem in a way that's satisfying. I hope. I mean, I don't want us to be left sat there being like, well, that was a letdown. I just put the controller down and now the game's over. But I think we need to, all of us, decide and kind of get on the same page about what is the main point that the story is trying to sell, to tell, and are we all okay with integration of the shadow self as the overarching story?
I always thought part of it was to embrace the darkness aspect, that she starts as innocence and slowly gains that shadow aspect. So
Right.
starting as Shadow Alice, I think, just kind of takes away that narrative plot device.
Yeah. So I also want to ask Greg, with regards to the idea that we, the player, have been controlling Shadow Alice through this adventure in Asylum, how that would impact the conversations and the missions and the goals that we would then have um, as the shadow character. Would we be in a position where, say, for instance, the queen would take away our rabbit and say, go do our bidding, go do the queen's bidding? Would we be in a position where the Mad Hatter would say, hey, help me to collect these pieces to put the Jabberwock back together? Would we be in a position, uh, where those kind of shaky alliances could be formed, or would everybody we encounter just be like, "What the hell are you? You're you're not. We've never seen you around here before. Weird shadowy thing, you know.
I mean, I guess that would be part of the challenge of how you could tell the story, especially since it seemed like at least some of Wonderland's inhabitants are villainous or potentially could manipulate or could see that perhaps the shadow doesn't realize what it is because the shadow self is the self. It knows it's perhaps not aware that it's this darker version of reality or of Alice, and perhaps that she thinks all along, oh hey, I'm just the girl, I'm going through this, I'm going to help these people, and that's why perhaps these characters ask her to do this stuff. They see this potential power and danger in this and like, well, we got to manipulate this and use this for our own ends.
And at the same time, you're saying that the young Alice has also been going ahead of the shadow Alice.
Perhaps is like again, it's like I've been kind of thinking it over and trying to find what way would it might work. But perhaps young Alice has either run ahead and warned people, you have to slow her down, you have to stop her. Perhaps the story would bring you full circle at the end. You would just return to shock and find the young Alice still there, that she had never progressed of her own, that she wasn't ready to face the horrors, and then Shadow Alice coming back, having gone through all this, is able to extend her hand and say, you know what, you need me to get past this. You have to embrace me to continue on and leave this trauma, and then the two of them could journey together forwards.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds to me like these stories, the suggestions here are, in terms of what's going to end up happening in the story, are relatively similar. Because in my mind, we have the shadow Alice is actually perhaps maybe she's going ahead of young Alice in this scenario, and she's ensuring that the challenge is all it needs to be to get young Alice to transform to who she needs to be to go forward in this fight. So I had always thought also that the form of Shadow Alice, it's the Alice that we know at the end of Alice Madness Returns, which of course would be Shadow Alice, who perhaps kicks off the whole narrative by saying, hey, I'm at the end of Alice Madness Returns, but something is left unresolved. What is it? I feel something's not right. And it's then that she reaches back in her memory. It all began with the night of the fire. And then as she steps through and watches herself, it starts to come back to her that she has left herself back there. That the child, her child self was left there so she could go forward and fight. So I was kind of hoping that the realization on the part of the player and of Shadow Alice would be that the integration of self is, the reintegration is important to both adult Alice to reintegrate the child so she's whole. And at that point where they reach the end of Asylum, it's also important to childhood Alice, because without embracing her shadow, then she can't go forward and fight. So I think that's the way I've been thinking about it. And I feel like it achieves the same goals that you're describing here. But maybe it's just, for me, it's about the perspective from which the story is told. And I feel like maybe the way I'm describing it makes sense to me more from the storytelling perspective.
Yeah, I see from your view of how to tell that story, that perhaps to see it from the child's angle, it definitely creates a different track than perhaps seeing it from the shadow's angle. Perhaps the one thing that I would say is that if we go through all of Asylum as Child Alice, and at the end she's like, okay, well, I killed all these monsters, but I can't kill the rest of them. You need to go forward and do them. It might be a little confusing to understand, like, okay, well, she beat all these guys. Why can't she keep going and beat the other ones? But it's perhaps just something that maybe I'm not quite understanding completely.
I think it's a good question. But I think it might be answered in them combining together. That the actual final defeat is the reintegration. Like to have Alice's story finally completely over, she has to recombine, so that the split was actually a part of the damage that was done by the fire, by Bumby, And so we have to have the split, the schism, in order for it to be repaired at the end so that she can say, haha, I've accomplished it all. Not only did I defeat my enemies, but I reintegrated myself, and now I'm whole, and now I can go on and live a happy, productive life. As far as the question of why that they would have decided to split at the end of Asylum before going into AMA AMR, I think it could just be simply chalked up to fear. You know, the child, your adult self, or mid-adult self, would say to the child, "You stay here. I'll go fight this fight." And now the child might argue, "Hey, I got us here so far. I should be able to come along." But you know how adults are, and you know how we can be counterintuitive and say to ourselves, "No, I'd rather repress you. I'd rather shut you down. I'd rather you stay behind." And of course, that's where a lot of psychological issues come from, is that we haven't integrated ourselves, our personalities. So I think having that split was actually part of the goal I had in mind. I mean, like, because I've personally been through that. You know, I know people who've been through that, where due to a trauma at an early age, they squash their child's self, and they take on a persona of fight, of anger, and it's this shell, it's an armor that becomes who they are, but it's not their true self. So I think that I would hope that would kind of make sense. That would answer that question.
Yeah, I definitely see that as a way to answer like one of the things that I was kind of confused wrapping my mind around with the ending. But yeah, I see that both kind
But
of
that's a
could work. Yeah.
But that's a good question, though. I mean, I think it's very useful for us to talk through these things, because a lot of times I'll think about them subconsciously. I don't really think about we need to explain that to the player. So I think what I just said about the aspect of your personality as an adult becoming a shell, a hard shell or armor, and you squash your inner child, that could be, you know, a big part of this, the whole story of integration. And we have to get there, and I have to explain that in the narrative in order for it to make sense to everybody.
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah, that makes
while
sense.
things are a little quiet, Kalo, I'm going to say that has been wanting to talk for a bit, so if we can get them on, that'd be
Okay.
fantastic.
Well, are you good, Greg? Is there anything else?
Yeah, sorry,
it's,
Greg.
no problem. I mean, that's essentially just the kind of idea. I mean, I can write more stuff out to maybe clarify my thoughts instead of being kind of discombobulated on Discord. But
No,
yeah, definitely some good explanation of like the things that I had been a little confused about. So
well, it's very, very good questions, though. I find that kind of questioning is really important, because, again, like I said, sometimes I tend to gloss over that stuff in my mind, and so that's very helpful stuff. And everything we just talked about, I need to get out, to explain that, so we're not, you know, we don't come up across that question again in the future.
all right, well, then I'll put myself
Alrighty.
on mute so next person can go. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, hi, I'm on.
Hello,
All
Kiara.
right.
Hi, first off, it's so great to be talking with you. I've been following this since it first came out, and you're fantastic. Yay.
Well, thank you. You are fantastic as well.
Well, thank you.
And how do we say
Anyway.
your name?
Oh, Kyo.
Kyo. Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm nerd. Anyway, so just side note, I thought you would appreciate this. I was at a Lolita community yesterday, and someone did a Lolita chord based on your version of the White Rabbit, and it looked really cool. I just wanted
great.
to. Cool. Anyway, thing I was thinking about, I was listening to the conversation, and like I had some ideas about that Shadow Alice bit of like you mentioned earlier, of like it seeming like not sure of if like how it could integrate, and it's like if you integrate it with them, it's like technically like you could do multiple endings, even how you decide what to do with Shadow Alice. Like if you like destroy more things, if you do things more passively, stuff like that, you can get different endings. Or like the idea of them becoming one, it doesn't have to necessarily be a good thing that they become one, but it is something like it is the last stage of grief, which is something that's a theme in this game, of the stage of acceptance, which is her accepting herself and the incident, even though it like festers in her and has a lot of evil and stuff, but she tries to accept it, even though it just rots her from the inside out. Alternatively, it's also a possible thought of like this Shadow Alice actually becoming the Queen of Hearts, of you think you're Alice the entire time, and it kind of ties into the the first Alice, of her being like, you can only get through things if you destroy it, if you poison it. This world will try to kill you. I should know. And it would kind of allude to her being the one that you're playing the antagonist the entire time. In the first one, you become the version of Alice, or the Shadow Alice becomes the version of Alice that becomes the technical Queen of Hearts.
Right. Well, we've always said that these characters, like the are aspects of Alice's personality. So there's not much of a leap to suggest that the voices that come from the Queen of Hearts or from these other characters are various aspects of Alice's psyche, of her personality. And so I think there's something to that, but I also think that the voice of the Queen of Hearts is sort of the extreme, one end of the spectrum, without a filter, without reason, without rationality. And that, and we all contain that. We all contain that secret little voice inside that, someone cuts us off in traffic and we go, maybe I ought to follow them home and burn their house down. But we don't, usually act on that. So I think that keeping the Queen of Hearts in the box of the Queen of Hearts, she's useful there. I think to suggest that she's one of the dominant players in Alice's psyche might suggest that Alice is more of a psychopath than I've ever really envisioned her as being.
That makes sense.
Right. But I do think that in Asylum we can hear echoes of the kind of birth of that character, where she's coming from, why at the beginning she's maybe the queen is a bit more of a voice. She sounds like a bit more of a voice of reason, and then we as the player will start to recognize that this is how tyranny starts. It starts with what sounds rational and reasonable, but we know it's going to skid towards this complete insanity.
Yeah, like she could be like one of those voices or one of those like tones that like seems like a helpful authority figure, like how the was in the other games. She seems like the helpful force, while Cheshire Cat to be doing like, I don't want to do that stuff. No, I'm gonna do what she says. I'm gonna go to the circus and that sort of stuff.
Exactly.
Self-care that goes real south real fast.
Yep, that's very true.
So it's just starting from there, and then it kind of gets psychopathic later on, but at that point she's like, oh god, what have I done?
Yes, that's very
true. But
true.
that's also a denial of having like any thought that she which also goes with the denial of the incident, denial that she's the one who kind of helped the Queen of Hearts get where she is now. So kind of ties in.
Yeah, for sure. I think all that ties in quite well. And but I think I think that's what you call retconning. If we were to take the queen and have her become Alice, or have Alice, the player that is Shadow Alice that we're playing, if we then revealed that all along that's actually been Alice in like her true form, I think some people might, I don't know, I guess we could ask the group here, but would we want that to be the reveal? I'm not for me personally, I don't feel like that's who I want Alice to ultimately be.
Or it could be, true Alice is the one who's fighting, and Shadow Alice is the one who becomes the Queen of Hearts. So it's all of her misery, all of her hate, all of everything that wants to just destroy things in her. It's just gotten loose and like kind of taken up the Queen of Hearts position. Because something else I thought of that I guess kind of comes back of like, technically, I don't know what your ideas if you want to keep the character of the Red Queen and the Queen of Hearts together, because I know the Red Queen is also a separate character, and like in the Looking Glass she made Alice a queen at one point. So I'm wondering, like, if it's a prequel, I'm wondering if we get any answers of like a Red Queen being a separate entity at any point, because that could be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. And the story we have so far, both of the queens will be characters that we come face to face with and that we interact with, and we're going to see the one queen, the Queen of Hearts, in her machinations work to destroy the Red Queen, and
Okay.
Alice is going to play a part in that. So yeah, that's part of the kind of central political battle that's unfolding inside of Wonderland during Asylum. That's the kind of consolidation of power that's going on at that level of her mind. And I think that that also plays into just how deep or dark the shadows are. So you could imagine that both of these characters on a subconscious level represent the sort of commanding or parental voices within her head, and that when this trauma occurs, one of the more rational commanding voices, that would be the Red Queen, is going to be murdered by the less rational of the two voices, that is Queen of Hearts. And so, of course, later on we see that the Queen of Hearts argues that anything can be justified for the sake of survival, which after an event like this would make sense. And so it's I think an interesting avenue for us to explore. Why is it that after trauma, some people sort of turn to the dark side, and some people use the trauma to improve themselves and grow? And so the conversation that's going on between these characters, especially the ones that are central power figures in the story, I think is going to be a kind of exploration of when certain voices in your head die and other ones fill the void, and how that might change your personality.
Uh-huh. That's super cool. That's like super duper cool.
Right.
And
Yeah, so I think that's kind of what we're exploring here, and yeah, we will be able to of those characters brought to life.
uh-huh. And like maybe like this is just an idea of you like mentioning that of like maybe you can have some essence of Lizzie in the Red Queen, because like as you made in a post that people get pointed out, hey, why wasn't Lizzie mentioned in the first one? It's like, well, maybe that's one of the voices who died in the trauma of Lizzie's remembrance,
That's
and
an
that might
interesting
have died
idea.
with the Red Queen.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea to have Lizzie be represented in Wonderland. An older sister would be a perhaps rational authority figure voice, because they're going to be closer to your age, but at the same time they're transitioning into a more mature state. So to have Lizzie represented as the Red Queen could make a lot of sense, and to see
Uh-huh.
the vision of her murdered by the even more authoritarian voice, Queen of Hearts. Yeah, that would actually neatly solve the question of why she's not mentioned later on. It's pretty good.
Yay. I'm so glad you like it.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, KO. And I hate the fact you went to a Lolita outfit. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
So, anything else before you go?
I think that's about it. I could ramble for hours, but I know everyone else here wants to talk, so it has been so great talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining in. And I think that's now two of you and Greg have both suggested some things that I think will help inform where we're going with this in a good way.
I'm glad. I'm super glad.
Yeah. All right. Truth Decay says plot established. Pack it up, folks. Yeah. Okay. Do we have any other comments that throw into where we are right now?
Quite a bit of people came through with things. We have one that Ice Killer wanted to bring up a couple times.
All right.
Find what he said.
I see Carbon Coast has posted up a picture here. He says, this is what I'm going to talk about. It's funny what he's posted here. I have a more medieval of that on my wall. Let's see if I can find it while you are picking out other comments that you want to mention.
All right. Well, Ice Killer said, what if Shadow Alice caused the chaos in Wonderland at the very beginning of the game, which caused the trouble for Alice when she was trying to progress, but the residents of Wonderland want to hunt Alice down for the chaos, and that is happening everywhere, and Alice also has to clear her name to regain their trust. And this could be part of the trial that the queen puts on for Alice when the card
Right.
guard captures her.
Uh, I guess I'm curious. The idea that Chaos Alice causes the chaos. I kind of thought maybe the chaos was caused by the fire, which was caused by Bumby. I mean, one of the ideas of chaos we do, and often there are many cases we as adults we set ourselves up for the chaos that comes into our lives. But I think it's also in this instance one where Alice is young and innocent enough that she's not the one who sort of breeds and unleashes the chaos. So is it the idea there that we're sort of punishing? I don't know. I guess I'd have to get a little more detail on that, how exactly that would work.
Mm. Did the
Is there a
Carbon
further
Coast
comment on
want to
that?
speak from their idea? I'm just asking.
He says, "This is what I'm hoping to talk about." And it puts up a overview of what a beat sheet looks like for and page count for your typical narrative. This would be something you would find in, say, like Hero with a Thousand Faces, the Joseph Campbell books, where they outline how Western narrative functions in terms of beginning, middle, and end for a traditional story. Like I said, I have a version of this. I don't know if I can find the image to paste into the chat,
All right.
but it shows the same thing broken into four major sections, and then it's divided along, the threshold of adventure split between tragedy and mystery, the departure into adventure, the initiation phase, the return from adventure, and then the reign and death, and it just kind of continues around in a circle. So this is generally how Western narrative is structured when you go to watch a Star Wars film, for instance. That's
Oh, okay.
oftentimes what it looks like. So here's the image that I have printed and pasted on my wall, if anybody is ever curious. This goes around counterclockwise, by the way.
Widdershins.
So if Carbon Coast wants to pop in and comment on that, that's fine.
Sure.
I don't know if his microphone is working.
Hi.
Oh, there we go.
Should be.
And raise your volume up a little bit if you could.
Sure.
Alice is the hero with 1,000 dresses. That's a good one.
All right. That should be better.
Yep.
All right.
All right.
Hey,
So you kind of
finally
already. Yeah. Hi. Hello.
Hi.
This is Connor Carbon, by the way. If you ever see the two
Yes.
different usernames, it's the same thing. So yeah, you kind of already addressed, and I was meaning to just kind of pop that question because I'm a little out of the loop due to E3 this week on the Patreon posts recently. But I guess I just was wondering if there has already been established on your side of things the kind of, so whenever I do world building, that chart that I and now you posted, I always hit that and pretend it's going to be, say, like a 200-page novel or something, and I try to always think, okay, what in my story world would be the catalyst or the big debate or the B story introduction, or so I guess, and I know you certainly wouldn't be any stranger to this concept, but I was wondering if us as a collective have kind of pinned down which of those, and I'm not saying you have to follow this because like you said, it's more of a Western thing, but I guess I'm wondering if we have pinned down the plot points of Alice Asylum to help us start roughing out, this all goes to the point you said in your recent Patreon post where you're asking, do you think it would be a good idea to spend, say, 15 minutes without exploring the starting area, the residents, without too much inciting incident going on. And then I've been watching E3 stuff all day, and I'm seeing just all the different variances of target demographics where some people are, incredibly impatient nowadays compared to 10 years ago. And then other people are like, wow, yeah, give me a slow build. So I'm just trying to think, maybe if we pin as many plot points as possible of Alice Asylum to that kind of more westernized, stripped down beat sheet, that might help. That doesn't mean it would have to be followed to the final product, but it might be a good way to start thinking of, when is that theme going to be stated, and when will that catalyst take us out of the starting area? So I just was wondering, my actual question is, do we have a kind of a basic plot point beat sheet layout for this game?
Okay. So first off, you're getting a lot of thumbs up on your speaking voice. I think people want you to narrate. Maybe you should be narrating the Alice Asylum. We'll do a spoken version of the
An
design.
audiobook. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did start off as one of the first ASM artists on the whole internet, so I must be
Wow.
carrying some of that stuff with me.
There you go. Well, it's a very pleasant voice, so welcome. So yeah, if you go and you look at the wiki, you'll see there is a section called Story. Now, one of my chief concerns about the way we currently have the menus set up is it doesn't necessarily capture some of the work that's been done, and a lot of that I've done in a spreadsheet where it kind of breaks down the sections of the story, the beats, the inciting incident. And so, yeah, the simple answer is yes, we have done some of that work. But I'm always really careful not to try to put too solid a structure on that early on. But it is definitely being thought of. And I think if we ask our mods where they would have copied and pasted the information from that spreadsheet, you might be able to see a little bit more about that.
Did we ever?
I don't know.
I don't know if we have.
Did I send you the sheet? that
You
has
did,
the
but I don't know
breakdown
if we
of
haven't
these?
put it up yet.
Okay.
I'm looking for it. Give me a little bit.
Should be in the drive.
It does exist. It is on the drive. Nowhere near complete, but it was the sketch outline that we're working to. And I've always kind of wished that it existed a little bit more on the wiki, because I feel like this is one of those basic questions we often come back to that probably needs more detail. So yeah, Carbon Coast?
You can say Connor.
Connor, okay.
Any of
So
those.
yeah, Connor, this is something we need to put a bit work and effort into displaying on the wiki. So if you wanted to join in on that, that would be fine. Because I feel like in my head, a lot of that is outlined. And I feel like when we have these talks, a lot of it has been covered, but it's not always recorded in the best fashion.
Right.
We'll make sure.
And
to
yeah,
get
if
that
you
up.
have ideas for that stuff, then please be sure to share them. You can also share those things in the comments over on the wiki.
Right. I did that on that last one. I wrote that essay.
Right. I'm looking at a timeline. So there is a timeline for the original Madness Returns, and I'll just show you like what we're going to be trying to work towards for the new game. I'm just going to copy and paste this. This is the kind of stuff that we do. I'm going to put this as an image into the chat here on Discord. So this is the kind of thing that we end up with after really sort of doing the work. And if you click on that, you'll see it starts off. There's actually a scene number and a total count for scenes, and then it has everything from the description of a preload sequence, and then those different color codings indicate where these things take place. So London, Wonderland, and then the TWL was, I think, indicative of Twilight London. It was sort of a crossover between London. It's like a dream space.
Excellent. That's really cool.
Yeah, so we do want to end up with this level of detail, like literally moment by moment in the game.
That's good. It sounds like you're placing a lot of emphasis on pacing, which I think is really important. Again, comparing today's market compared to, it was about, I'll just say a decade ago. It's probably a really good thing to be on top of that, especially since I think you're in the Eastern market and have been kind of immersed in that for so long. And I certainly wouldn't think you'd be out of touch with the Western market, but it does seem to be increasingly attention deficit. And I think it was really cool seeing in your post that you're putting a lot of emphasis into thinking like, man, I would love to have the first 15 minutes be explorative, but then it's also down to those focus groups and play tests, and how will that be received. So I just wanted to see where we're at on that, I guess.
Yeah, I would like it if we could try to make the game that we want in terms of pacing and mood. And a lot of times that means that we have to ignore the impulse to. And look, this a lot of times it'll come from the publisher. It'll come from the marketing department. They'll say, "Hey, you can't have all this slow stuff going on at the start because the people who review the games will get bored and they'll give it a negative review before they've even gotten 20 minutes into the game." And I say, screw those people. We're going to make the game that we want to make at the pacing we want to make. And if those kind of reviewers don't like it, then so be it. And a lot of times what you see is that the review scores in those instances, you get very high user review scores, and you get lower critical review scores. And for sure that was the case with Alice Madness Returns. It's got user review scores in the high 80s, and it's got a critical review scores in the 70s. So the users clearly liked what we did, and the reviewers couldn't figure out the pacing, right?
Absolutely. The other thing I wanted to ask before I hop off to Mute Land would be, uh, again, I don't really know. This isn't a suggestion per se, but I was wondering when I think of story in any medium, I always wonder who it's meant most to affect and in what ways. And like, for example, say there is a young woman out there who is struggling with, say, bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder. Um, I can see that type of person really, really. I personally have generalized anxiety disorder, so I guess that could be one. And I'm sure everybody has kind of their own madness, and I think we all want to relate not only to the madness of Alice, but the resolve she seeks. And I know you guys have been hitting on that at in this session and probably in many other times. So I just wanted to bring up to the group in general. I'd love to see where we're at in terms of, again, who this is meant for in terms of, relating to that kind of that madness, and then the resolve that they hope to get out of the gameplay, and what it metaphorically represents and all those kind of things. And again, not a question. I just wanted to bring that topic up.
Well, that's spot on. And this is one of the disconnects that I had previously, where we'd have, we won't name the company, but a marketing department came to me and they said, look, our core demographic are these gamers, and gamers are 18 to 26-year-old males, and 18 to 26-year-old males want X, Y, and Z. They want blood splats on the screen. They want cleavage. Can we crank up the sexiness and the violence a little bit? And I was disappointed, I guess is one way to say it. But because I'm right with you, when I think about the fans of the game, oftentimes I'm thinking of the people that the games will help, because those are the emails that I get, and we get them almost daily from people who say, "Hey, these games helped me," and so I think that indicates the powerful nature of the medium and of the stories we're telling. And it's very important for our view of the demographics of the players to be that, not, oh, it's 18 to 25-year-old males. Not that there's anything wrong with 18 to 25-year-old males, but that's not a fine enough audience in terms of detail about who they are and why they're gaming, for me to sit down and write a story. Because then if I was going to sit down and write a story for that, then yeah, it would just turn out that it was like blood squirting out of boobs, and that's not the kind of game we're going to make.
Right. Exactly. I think that's great. That's really admirable that you take that to heart, because I think I've seen a lot of your community, this community, again, being an ASM artist since 2010, very similar, where most people who are attracted to it are more or less, kind of suffering and want
Yep.
to kind of relate to something. So I think it's really cool that what's one thing I've always noticed about American McGee's Alice as like a thing is that it's visceral and cool and edgy and all those cool things that a lot of people like out of video games, but it also has a great culture around it that it seems to be therapeutic, and I'm just I was really happy to see that there's kind of the stages of grief being explored in this upcoming one, because I think that's just a really good kind of subconscious element of the collective conscious, I guess, going on right now with the world. So yeah, thanks for that, and thanks for letting me bring up those couple points. I'd love to pass the mic over to whoever else wants to talk.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for joining in, and I'm glad you, Mike. That clearly suits you.
Yeah, I'll try to stop by next time too.
All right. Well, we've just come up at the top of the hour, and these sessions are usually about an hour long. So unless anybody, like our mods, have got anything super critical to announce, we might just wrap it up here. It's been a really good session, and we could end on a high note with the graceful notes of Carbon's voice tickling our ears.
Yes, I think ending with the ASMR artist works fine for that.
I was really happy to
go.
hear a bunch of new voices too, just coming in. Need to have more.
Yes,
of
Yeah,
that.
really
sure.
great to hear everybody. So thank you guys for showing up. It's been a bit of time, but great to see new people.
We can try to extend the next session a little bit. I apologize. My mom and stepfather and my wife's mother are all here, and my wife is going on 7 months pregnant. That's why everybody's gathered together, and so we're doing a kind of family get together prior to the baby popping out. And so that's one of the reasons I need to run away. But they'll all be taking off actually tomorrow. We'll do another live stream on YouTube this week, myself and Martin's, aka Font Lord. And then next week's design session, we could try to do a bit longer if we've got content to fill that up.
Oh, we got content.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually only made it through, what, 3 things this time?
I think so.
There you go.
Yep, 3 whole questions.
But
3 whole
we got,
questions.
but it was very good, and I think very meaningful, the things that we discussed here today. So I'm very happy with this today's session.
Oh, quality over quantity, definitely.
Yep,
There you
definitely.
go.
It wouldn't be without.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say it wouldn't be out without people here. So thank you guys, as you've said. You know, this is really cool. Like, I think
Yes,
this has
thank
been
you, all of our insane children. So just to wrap up, this has been crowd design session number 12. And if you would like to join in the voice chat next time and you have a sexy voice to contribute, do consider becoming a patron. The links to our Patreon channel, our Patreon page, are in the description below. There you will also find links to the wiki for Alice Asylum over on AmericanWiki.com, and you can use that to follow along. And I hope you've not got to the end of this on YouTube and been commenting as if this was a live transmission, because it is not. This is recorded and then posted up to YouTube once the live session on our Discord server is over. And big thank you to Hysteria Visual for capturing and sending those videos for us to post up each and every time. So that's it for this week's session, and we will join you again, same time, same place next week.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks
See you
everyone
next
for
time.
joining us.
Take care, everyone.
Bye
Make sure to
bye.
like, subscribe,
Jib it
Click
up.
and like and jib it up.
jib it up.
Bye bye.